Okay, hopefully you guys like history because there's going to be some history involved in this presentation. I'll start back in 1964. There was a situation in Georgia where the government of Georgia was trying to kind of adjust the size of congressional districts to make sure that certain people got elected. So there were certain districts that had a small number of people and they got one representative, and there was other districts with a much larger number, double, triple, and got one representative. And this ended up going to the Supreme Court in 1964. The case is called Westbury versus Saunders. And basically what the Supreme Court said was the House of Representatives, according to the Constitutional Convention, was to represent people as individuals and on a basis of complete equality of each voter. Basically making the point that each voter, each citizen should be represented equally, and there shouldn't be this disparity between some, let's say for example, 10,000 people get one representative and then 50,000 people get another representative. So obviously those people that are in the smaller group have more influence on the government as an individual. So before I get to my claim, I kind of want to give you guys some definitions about some of the words I'll be using. First one that's really important is apportionment, and that's actually the process by which things happen, how they divide the districts, how they decide to do that. It's called apportionment, and that's based on population, and that population information comes from the census, and the census is basically, it's not a survey, it's actually the U.S. government goes out and gets information on every single person in the country, population, demographic data, and they use that in order to decide how many representatives each state will get in the House of Representatives, and that also determines how many electoral votes each state will get. Then there's also the American Community Survey, which is a survey similar to the census, but it only counts a certain sample of people, and that is done in between the censuses because they're only done every 10 years because they're so expensive and so extensive. So this American Community Survey is what I'll be using data for because that's more current. The last census was in 2000. The next census will be in 2010 right now. Actually, it's in April. So to preview my claims really quickly, I want to talk about that the assumptions made, and all of this is written in the Constitution, this idea of apportionment and the census and representatives, that's all in the Constitution. So I want to make the point, number one, that the assumptions in the Constitution are sort of misunderstood. Excuse me, let me go back to my main claim, I apologize. The main claim I want to make is that counting non-citizens in the 2010 census for purposes of reapportioning districts and representatives will most likely have a negative impact on our democratic process in the United States. And to support that, I'm going to talk about the assumptions that are made about the Constitution, which are, I think, incorrect, and also talk about how non-citizens make up quite a large portion of the population, and that this population of non-citizens is varied all over the country. Those areas, number three, those areas with a higher non-citizen population have more political power per citizen. Basically, the vote of an individual citizen is diluted. So first thing to look at is, I have a quote here from the Wall Street Journal. It's an article from a Mr. John Baker who teaches constitutional law at Louisiana State University, and he said, he's focusing specifically on illegal immigrants, which is one type of non-citizen. There's also legal immigrants. But the counting of illegal immigrants in the census will unconstitutionally increase the number of representatives in some states and deprive other states of their rightful political representation. And I think the problem is that this idea of illegal immigration did not really exist when the Constitution was written, so we've kind of had to interpret how to deal with that. He makes the point that the Constitution calls for the census to count inhabitants, and in those days, he's taking this information from the Oxford English Dictionary. An inhabitant was what was considered a bona fide member of the state, like authentic or actual. And if someone's here illegally, you couldn't really see them being counted as someone who's actually supposed to be here. So I think that's one issue, that they're counting non-citizens currently in the census, which goes into my second point. These non-citizens actually make up quite a large portion of the population. In fact, it's 7.2% of the entire population of the United States, about 21.5 million. to kind of give you some information locally, in LA County, we have almost 20% non-citizen population, and to compare that to, say, Ohio, they have 1.9% non-citizen population. So you can see that if we count non-citizens, that it can actually affect the population, which then therefore affects the political representation. So third point then being those areas with a higher non-citizen population have more political power per citizen. And going back to Mr. Baker's article, he pointed out that by his projections, if non-citizens are counted in 2010, that California is likely to get 4 extra representatives that we don't currently have, whereas if non-citizens were not counted, we would actually lose 5 representatives, so that's a difference of 9 representatives. And there's a lot of states that can gain from this where there's a lot of immigration, like Arizona, California, and Florida, but a lot of states lose in the sense that they get less votes because of these non-citizens. So as a citizen, you want to make sure that your voice is heard and that you have an equal representation in the government. And the fact that non-citizens are being counted in the census for this reapportionment of districts has a negative impact on your ability to be represented and on the whole democratic process in the United States.
All right, Jeff, I know that you have a lot of material that you have to explain before you get to your argument, but it's 2.5 minutes into the speech before you finally get to your proposition. So you're going to need to figure out a way to kind of condense the idea and then maybe use some of that material that you've got in the introduction to support the supporting points and explain the argument there instead of trying to get it all up front. I think that that's a little bit problematic because by the time you get to the proposition, people might be drifting off on what the point is that you're trying to make. Once you get to the point, I think you explain it pretty clearly. There's okay signposting on the secondary points. You had a good quote and a couple of good statistics on the first and second point that you have. I think you need to show what the impact would be, for instance, in apportionment of not just representation in Congress, but maybe some other things that might have an impact on the country. Distribution of resources, for instance. The apportionment of the representatives in Congress also has an impact on presidential politics, for example, because of the amount of electoral votes. And so I think there's more of the argument to be developed. You basically present us with this dilemma. At the heart of the dilemma is a question that's a value issue, whether or not these people should be included. And I think it's a little hard for you to kind of get around that. And if you're going to try and get around it, you really need to show what the practical implications are instead of just the philosophical questions there. I think the pacing's a little bit problematic. Your timing, you go a little bit over time. And again, I think that's partially because you spend so much time sort of setting everything up. You got to be quicker on that. All right, thank you.